September the 2nd passed without much fanfare, but something world-changing happened. Russia, China, and Mongolia signed a legally binding memorandum that will now redirect energy flows from Europe to Asia amid geopolitical tensions and Europe's pivot to costlier US LNG. And now Europe will lose access to the cheap energy that has underpinned its economic growth for over a half a century. The global energy map has been redrawn, and the full consequences on the already declining fortunes of the EU will soon begin to emerge, and they do not look good for the beleaguered bloc. I think it's pretty clear that countries that make up the Western world are on a civilizational suicide race to the bottom, some much worse than others. Think Canada, think Sweden. The great nations of Europe especially are engaged in a self-engineered slow-motion collapse with the self-sabotage of their economies and, more importantly, their societies. And just as the US recently mopped the floor with Ursula von der Leyen in the US-EU trade deal, now would be a very good time if the US was to seize the initiative to fix its own broken immigration system. It could do so with bold and not so original ideas, but it would, like in so many other ways, come at the expense of Europe. And these not so original ideas were taken as self-evident only about a half a century ago, and that is to source new citizens from countries that are not only culturally and linguistically compatible, but now even more so as most European nations have standards of education that are higher than that in the US. Put simply, instead of open borders that the US as well as Europe have suffered under for decades, allowing all the world to move in, and in many cases having groups of people from culturally distant and incompatible cultures arriving, the US should go back to its roots and begin using the economic and social chaos that has been engineered in Europe by its elites to lure the best and brightest to its shores, rather than continue the broken and failed system that has brought the country the chaos that we are now having to watch President Trump try and clean up. It's time to stop importing foreign ideas and again get back to America's roots. As nations debate the influence of foreign ideas on their cultural fabric, individuals too are seeking ways to fortify their personal resilience and vitality to navigate these societal shifts. And one way to do so is by prioritizing health and energy, which brings us to the cutting-edge solution. So then, let's talk about NMN from Black Forest. It's a game-changing supplement that boosts NAD+ in your body, promoting health, longevity, and energy. Dr. Andrew Huberman, a Stanford neuroscientist, recently discussed on Joe Rogan's podcast how NMN's incredible benefits have pharmaceutical companies scrambling to patent it as a prescription drug.
We were talking, I think last time we spoke about supplementation as it relates to, metabolic pathways. And one thing I've been tracking pretty closely is this whole, the NMN thing has now taken a different direction.
I was going to bring it up before we wrap this up. So let's explain NMN for people. It's a precursor for NAD+.
Right. NAD is critical to energy production in all cells, vital. And levels of NAD tend to go down as we age. It's an absolute requirement for cellular health in life. You need it. Some years ago, as David Sinclair came on this podcast and discussed that his laboratory is a tenured professor of genetics, Harvard Medical School, and other laboratories are starting to explore stimulating the NAD pathway as a tool for extending lifespan. You can't just take NAD, or you can, but it doesn't get into cells very easily. There are basically two ways that you can tickle this pathway, increase NAD. One is to take NMN. NMN could soon be a prescription drug that you can only get with a prescription. And then I think Metro International Biotech will likely hold the patent. I will say with NMN, a couple of things happened. First of all, energy, my recovery from workouts much better. I had to take it early day because it was giving me a lot of energy. I did notice like my hair and nails growing at a ridiculous rate. And then I came off it just as a control experiment, slowed down again. So it was really interesting. I think there's something there in cellular growth pathways.
Interesting.
You'll feel the difference. More energy, faster workout recovery, and it's a vital part of maintaining a healthy lifestyle. I myself am stocked up, and you should be too before it's locked behind a prescription wall. And right now, for the next 48 hours, use the link in the description for an exclusive deal. And that is buy 2 NMN bottles and get 1 free. Grab yours at blackforestsupplements.com/pigeon and get yourself feeling better, as your health is the most important thing you have. When looking at Europe, where does one even begin? In a nutshell, over a relatively short span of time, we have seen the EU having to shell out double for its NATO contributions, at least 4 times for the cost of its energy, which is accelerating its deindustrialization, then being left holding the bag for paying for the proxy war in the Ukraine, and now the dramatic falling off in its living standards and the massive increase in the number of migrants arriving who are all in need of state handouts. Europe's self-created social and economic implosion is a tragi-comedy spectacle. Germany, who allowed its own infrastructure to be destroyed, namely that of the Nord Stream pipelines, has seen energy prices spike while at the same time the country's economy is contracting and cratering. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has also admitted that the welfare state in that country can no longer be financed as it's being crushed by an aging population, as well as the Herculean task of integrating the millions of migrants that have arrived since 2015 and the throwing open of the country by the former Chancellor Angela Merkel. Add that to the steep rise in crime and social unrest. Well, this has now seen tectonic changes to the country's social and economic landscape, and not in a good way. The United Kingdom, for its part, is currently just as broke as everyone else and is flirting with an IMF bailout. And at the same time, regular riots all over the country with regards to non-European migrants being forced on the populace at the taxpayer expense are making headlines daily. More so because of the total loss of legitimacy that the government has sustained, especially in its handling of the grooming gang scandal that it, the police, the judiciary, the councils, and social workers all aided and abetted. Because nothing says stability like having children carrying around axes for protection and then being arrested for the failure of the police to do their job. France, Spain, Italy, and the smaller countries are also suffering under the same yoke and the same self-inflicted issues as Germany and the UK. In sum, Europe has become a collection of overtaxed, authoritarian, crime-ridden states where life is becoming not only harder, but less rewarding for the producing class that is having to support an ever-growing number of people that are dependent upon the state. Now, how does this have anything to do with the United States and fixing at least some of the issues with regards to its broken immigration system? Well, the system is, of course, a bureaucratic dumpster fire that treats a Berlin scientist more harshly than a rando that flies into Mexico, as they do from all over the world, and then jumps the fence at the border. Because here's the thing. Of course, for many in 2025, this would be a heretical position. But the U.S. immigration system, creaking, antiquated, and frankly delusional as it is, needs a ruthless overhaul. And probably one of the best things the country could do would be to use the precipitous decline of Europe to poach its best and brightest while their home countries are busy imploding. Now, this should be clear that this is not a new idea. It's not a revolutionary idea. All one would have to do is go back to the Hart-Celler Act of 1965 and look at the system that was in place previous to that act that worked for 200 years. And it was one that prioritized Europeans whose cultural heritage meshed effortlessly upon arriving in the U.S. Yes, of course, there will be talk of the issues of the Irish or the Italians, but integration came quickly as those arriving shared a kindred cultural, religious, and to some extent linguistic heritage to those already in the U.S. and those who built the country. The massive demographic transformative 1965 Immigration Act, well, it threw open the gates to everyone everywhere, creating a Kafkaesque nightmare where talent drowns in paperwork. It's almost poetic, a system so egalitarian it screws over the very people who'd thrive and then at the same time rewards fence jumpers. And why this matters is, well, enter Robert Putnam, the liberal Harvard sociologist who reluctantly dropped the truth bombs in his 2007 study on multiculturalism. And brace yourselves, found that diverse communities are often trust-deficient, socially fragmented hellscapes. I know, who could have imagined? But basically what he found is that areas that were more diverse had much less social trust. Neighbors stopped chatting, civic clubs dissolved, and everyone retreats into their tribal bunkers. Putnam's data showed that high diversity areas correlate with lower social capital, weaker volunteering, and a general vibe of, I don't know you and I don't want to know you. By almost every metric, multiculturalism, it turns out, isn't a Disney movie or a reimagined Netflix series. It's a slow burn divorce. The United States, in its quest to be the world's cultural buffet, well, it has ignored this and has been busy piling on needless social complexity while integration in the country has sputtered to an almost standstill. Moreover, and this is important, studies have found that a majority of immigrant-headed households, both legal and illegal in the United States, use at least one major welfare program compared to 39% of US-born households. So here is the cheeky fix. Prioritize European immigrants. Step 1 is to fling open visa-free work access to most of Europe. Almost all young and middle-aged Europeans have a very good command of the English language. Thus, if you're an English speaker with a job offer, welcome them in 90 days. No PhD in form filling required. Step 2, get greedy. Snag professionals and skilled tradesmen from Western, Northern, Eastern, and Southern Europe. But only the real deal, not some passport-waving H-1B imposter. Step 3, ditch the welfare trap. Offer working rights, not food stamps, no Section 8 housing, nothing. Go back to America's roots. Those that do not work do not eat. And watch integration happen faster than you can say cultural fit. Step 4, steal a page from history. European immigrants built the United States, its bridges, railroads, skyscrapers, all of it, despite what some misguided as well as disingenuous people might say. European immigrants, they built it, thus they can certainly maintain and help it grow. Step 5, play chess, not checkers. Europe's demographic nosedive, 20% of the population in some places like Bulgaria, for example, by 2050, or the catastrophic contraction in Ukraine, means a talent exodus is coming. Not to even speak of those wishing to leave the now authoritarian states of the EU, or those that just wish to make more money. Actually, this could also be open to countries like Canada, where I know for a fact many would like to escape the socialist dystopia that has been created north of the border. But as of now, it's been almost impossible for Canadians to make their way south, even though the United States is the most similar country in almost every aspect to Canada anywhere in the world. Of course, there will be pushback, and of course I do see problems, as there are significant numbers of those that are very anti-European and anti-European American in the United States. Think NGOs, groups like the virulently hateful ADL, SPLC, and others, including the Democrat Party. Well, they will, of course, shriek ethnocentrism and white supremacy. Same as they did when a few dozen South Africans arrived earlier this year. Interestingly, their motives were on full display for all to see, as they were all of a sudden not wanting to support immigrants' rights because those immigrants were white. But these groups that are filled with malice, filled with bile, filled with contempt, rage, and anger against Europeans and European Americans, well, they can be reassured that the demographic experiment in North America is now all but unstoppable. Even if tens of millions of Europeans did arrive, nothing will stop the ever browner future of America. And it should be clear, and to be fair, that this presentation isn't about skin, it's about synergy and cultural compatibility. And just because European immigrants would happen to be white, well, given the fact that up until 1965 the US was almost 90% European American, I don't really see a problem. And let's be clear, the vast majority of Europeans aren't going to want to get on an airplane and move to the United States. As it should be pointed out, the United States lacks Europe's beautiful cities and villages. It's a car-dependent, mostly ugly suburban sprawl, and occasionally mass-shooting mess. But let's be clear, it pays better in the US, and these are the kinds of people America wants. It doesn't want the dependent, it wants the ambitious. Now, some will call this a band-aid solution for a broken nation, that being the United States drowning in $37 trillion of debt, and that's a fair assumption. But self-sufficient Europeans won't be adding to that tab. Europe's disintegration is the United States' opportunity. And this idea is not about locking doors, it's about opening the right ones with a wink and nod to what actually works and what did work for the entire history of the United States until it was all overturned in 1965. So what do you think? Leave me your ideas in the comment section below. Also remember to check to see that you are still subscribed, as YouTube has unsubscribed tens of thousands of people without their knowledge or consent. Also remember to click the alert bell for all notifications, as YouTube does not notify my subscribers when new videos are uploaded. Also, remember to check the sponsor of today's video, Black Forest Supplements, and their amazing product, NMN, to help you be the best you can be. And with that, thanks for watching, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye for now.